Hi, I'm Chris Grimm, founder, coach, principal consultant of ARIA Consulting. For 24 years, we've been serving leaders and their teams around the world. This podcast, which I wanted to call The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, but is called And Then I, is nothing scripted, nothing fancy. I promise that we'll be talking about successes and failures. It's the gold, I call it, that you find only in real stories with real leaders in real time. With that, I invite you to sit back, soak up the wisdom here of these everyday superheroes. Enjoy. Hi, everybody. It's Chris Grimm from ARIA Consulting. I'm so glad you're here today. It's been a while, and this is going to be an awesome kind of come back into podcasting. This year, we took a little break, and today I am with an awesome superhero of a human, Dr. Elisa Hallerman, who, let me just tell you first, because she's my friend, not just a business associate, that recently she had her 20-year sober birthday. Awesome. And I gave her a card, and in it, I told her all the ways that I describe her to people. So I just decided to do that today too, so you guys can know. Badass, queen, no mercy killer, guardian angel, savior. I mean, come on. I don't even know. I don't know how to describe her better than that. In a minute, you'll know why. Elisa is not just a PhD, but also a lawyer who came out of the entertainment industry. I'm going to let her tell you the whole story in a bit, but I'm just going to tell my version and why she's here today. Everybody knows my goal with this podcast was to bring real life to leaders of all levels. So anybody who's listening and watching, so that they could get an education around, I called it, and then I ... because I want the real stories, not the ones that always end up in a book. And by the way, this awesome human has a book coming. It's called Sobriety, a plan for healing trauma, overcoming addiction, and taking control of your life. Wait, let's see if I got it right. Don't say it. I'm looking. No. A plan to heal your trauma, overcome addiction, and reconnect with your soul. It's going to be amazing. It's called Sobriety. And it doesn't exist. Sobriety. Yeah. Something that doesn't exist. And by the way, that's actually a great intro to you, Elisa, and I want you to talk about it because I think you're just a pioneer. Like I believe your recovery management agency, I don't even know if that existed before. Maybe it did, maybe it didn't. I don't think it existed the way you do it. So maybe that's a great entry point because I probably won't do justice to this, but everybody, I asked her to do this with us because I think everything we're going to talk about today about taking care of people now in the workplace and being a great leader and manager, I think that's changed. And I don't know that the way we're training people to do it has yet changed enough. And so let me shut up. Elisa, you tell them who you are and why RMA and why Sobriety. That'll give context.
Well, first of all, thank you for that amazing introduction, Chris. There was one thing on the card that I don't agree with, but I can't remember which line it was that you said.
No mercy killer. You don't believe that?
Yeah, that one. That might scare my customers away.
I mean it in the best way.
I know you do. Okay, so I once upon a time was an attorney living in New York City. I went straight to law school after college and practiced law right after law school. I really did not love being an attorney. I did not love living in New York City, and I did not love my boyfriend at the time. So when given the opportunity to move across the country with my sister, I took it. When I got to Los Angeles, there was no way that I was going to take the California bar, nor did I want to practice anymore. So I started working in the entertainment business. Now, mind you, this was pre-internet, so I really didn't know anything about the entertainment business whatsoever. There was no sort of social media or anything like that it exists right now where you can learn all about it. So I get to Los Angeles, and a friend of a friend of a friend introduces me to an agent at ICM. long story short, I get a job working as an assistant at ICM for a TV talent agent. I immediately knew that this is what I wanted to do, that I would be able to use my law degree, but I would also be able to do something that I thought was exciting and creative. That was really important to me as well, and something I was lacking as an attorney. And so I ended up leaving ICM and going to United Talent Agency, UTA, and I had a career there for 12 years. My career there really took off after I got sober in 2002. Prior to that, I was self-medicating a lot of trauma with drugs and alcohol. It's not to say that I wasn't an alcoholic prior to some of the traumas that occurred. I definitely was. I think I was born that way. And but I did not realize at the time what the word trauma meant. And that's something we can discuss in a little bit. One of those small words that means a lot of different things to a lot of people, and important that we define it, especially in the work culture. After getting sober, I had a lot of quote unquote success in the entertainment business. And I say that because I think the way that we define success is different for everybody. For me, back then, success meant money, prestige, power, corner offices, the right car, the right seat at the restaurant table. And I believed after getting sober that all of these promises, that all of these things that I was striving for, and then things that I couldn't even imagine that came my way, were all going to be the things that quote unquote fixed me. And what I didn't realize was that as human beings, we don't need to be fixed at all. We're not cars. We need to heal. And that healing work is an inside job. But those words were confusing to me. How do you get inside? Where do you start? How do you do the work? What does that even mean? Where are the instructions? And so I was at a loss. So despite the fact that I had all of these things that I thought I wanted, I felt unfulfilled. I felt sad still. And I felt like I was disconnected from my soul. I started to do some inner work and found some great mentors and some books and classes and so on, and eventually decided to retire from the entertainment industry and went back to school to become a drug and alcohol counselor, as well as get my master's and doctorate in psychology, really focusing on trauma and neuroscience. When I was writing my dissertation for grad school, I wanted to, let me back up. One of the things that I studied in grad school was depth psychology. That's DEPTH psychology, which is a belief in the unconscious and visualizing everything through the lens of soul and doing deep rooted work and archetypal psychology and a lot of Jungian psychology and so on. So my dissertation wanted to ask the question, could practicing soul-centered work lead to long-term recovery? And the answer was yes. But what I found in the research was that while people were engaging in this sort of soul-centered exploration and healing, they didn't have the language for what it was that they were doing exactly. And so that kept me really curious as to, I realized how, for me, I didn't understand the language of soul and connect the dots between trauma and soul and addiction until I went to school. So sobriety was born out of my deep desire to give everyone the language of soul so that they could understand how to work on their own inner healing. And that could be from anything. The book is called Soulbriety, but anyone who has either suffered from any sort of addiction whatsoever, whether that be substances or cigarettes or social media or trauma, or has a loved one that has gone through any of these things, you will really find the book to be quite useful and helpful, as well as hearing my story through different careers, which was something that I was really terrified to leave, a career that I'd worked so hard to get to where I was and felt like I had these golden handcuffs, and that leaving would somehow mean failure, which was not a word in my vocabulary, and not recognizing that in order to quote unquote grow down, something I talk about a lot in the book, that it was okay to move on to something new and to learn something new and hopefully achieve, which is a word I prefer now instead of succeed, achieve in doing something that was going to fill me up.
Yeah, that was beautiful. So let me connect some dots for everybody. In 2018, Elisa called me and had the opportunity to work with a firm like Aria to take some of her ideas about bringing what was the emerging ideas around sobriety, right, into the workplace, but with a partner that understood the workplace. We've been in business for, now it's been 25 years, then it was 20 plus years. And so immediately, I just want to say, if people didn't just figure it out while you were talking, we started, playing a really great game of ping pong, right? And putting together, oh my gosh, like after 20 plus years of executive coaching and work, my team consistently finds that people are increasingly opening up in the workplace, sometimes in a way that the workplace isn't prepared for. Their leaders, their managers, HR, sometimes not knowing how to deal with what often is someone who's struggling. And before COVID, and Elisa, you and I have talked about this, and I just want everybody who's listening, because I really want some learning to come from this. If you're a newer leader, there are new rules now, and those new rules are being defined, but it's becoming very common because in social media and culture, right, mental health is now an open conversation, or it's becoming a more open conversation. To your point, Elisa, and I don't think we're in the right place yet, but concepts like trauma and psychological safety, coping mechanisms. I can't tell you how many times now when I meet with my team and we're debriefing, what are we observing in our coaching and leadership development sessions, whether they're in person or online, same things are happening. People have language now. And I think the pendulum has swung a little far, and we can talk about this because people are putting those terms out there, oftentimes not really knowing what they are, what they mean. But the genie's out of the bottle. And so now the workplace, has to respond, because the whole person was always coming to work, but we couldn't always show the whole person. And now, for whatever reason, the boundaries are changing and people are bringing their whole self there. And in ways that the workplace doesn't always know. Leaders and managers don't always know what to do with that information. And let's talk about that, because you and I know it's a problem we both want to, maybe not a problem. It's a new way of thinking that we've been talking about. Like, okay, how do we help this? How do we help this turn into a new way of work?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is a problem. I just don't think that there's an easy solution. And I think that what we need to do is just keep highlighting the importance of talking about mental health and recovery from addiction and substance abuse. We're so far past people not wanting to talk about either of those things because
Right.
of stigma.
Yep.
I think for the most part, we're now moving past that part. We can check that off the box of we've done a really good job now of getting that stigma reduced in many, many areas and in many companies for sure.
Mm.
But what we're finding now is that more and more people are suffering, and those numbers are increasing exponentially year after year, especially post-pandemic.
Mhm.
And people, again, don't have the right language to describe what it is that they're feeling or what they feel might be wrong.
Mhm.
And I believe that there's enough humanity and empathy within every company that they do naturally want to help. You don't want to see your coworkers or your employees suffering. There's always an awareness that something is wrong.
Mm.
But what to do about it or how to create language around that is essentially the issue. And it's really no different from when people come to me to hire RMA, my agency, when they come in with symptoms. This is what's happening. And he didn't show up to work and he's not going here and he hasn't been sleeping. And I found this and I don't know what it is. And can I send you a picture of what I found in his bedroom? And this is happening and this is happening. And I'm like, okay, got it. Let's go back and really explain the narrative and the journey of this person's life. And let me really understand what's happening, because without having an understanding of what lies underneath, all the symptoms are going to look the same, whether it's substance abuse, depression, anxiety, PTSD. The symptoms are going to look similar for every person. And so I don't think it's incumbent upon an employer to know what the answer is or what to do. But I do believe that we need to educate just like we would in any other. Me and you have talked about this in the Me Too era and the diversity. We have to be able to talk about language and we have to be able to highlight what things actually mean.
Yeah. Well, and I think, let me just insert something, because you and I have talked about it and I want to make sure it's super clear to anyone who's watching or listening. And that is, we are deeply aware, believe me, these two people, we have spent hours, if not days, thinking about what are the obstacles to what we're proposing. And, you know, we have had shared clients where we are invited to help think about this in a new way. And what I mean by that, so let's just get clear. Historically, large companies, large enterprise with great, talented, sophisticated human resource people and the resources to provide employees with perks and benefits like EAP, which many large companies have a benefit where you may have a hotline or a 1-800 number to call a therapist or to call a specialist or a counselor so that you have privacy, that you don't always have to. And all of you are leaders and managers, I'm sure you're picking up on this. It becomes sensitive if you believe an employee has a problem. And like Elisa said, most of us have watched enough movies, if not had our own experiences, that we kind of know some of the signs. If someone's showing up hungover every day, or maybe they're actually inebriated at work, or now because pot is legal in a lot of places and people are smoking pot more often, that you think that's happening on a regular basis and you're not really sure if it's okay or not. And as their boss, maybe you believe it's impacting the way that they work. And so we know, I just want to say this out loud, that sometimes that feels dicey. And I've been coaching leaders enough to know those conversations often, like, what do I do? If I take it to HR, it could ruin their career. And so we know that this is the new territory here, is not that people aren't sharing or maybe even willing to talk about where they're struggling or having problems. It's what do you as a leader or manager do with that in a system that has not yet evolved to the point where it feels safe enough to talk about it in a way that the person's going to get the help they need. And I think I just want to lay that out because Elisa, that's really what you and I have been talking about for a long time, which is the stigma might be less, but the process in most businesses. And I think that the smaller the business, frankly, if you get out of big enterprise and into mid-level businesses and even small businesses that don't have HR, right? That don't have policy and procedure and process and things that tell leaders and managers how to handle situations, whether it's sexual harassment or, like you said, there's a whole host of things that business now has to deal with. They're not going away. The humans have real issues, but not every manager and leader has a support system and the education to know what to do in those situations. And I think it's incumbent on us. And, I hope as sobriety starts to become normal, right? You just made up a word. I hope it becomes a normal word, and the concepts that you have therein become more normalized so that maybe we can bring tools to leaders and managers. But let me ask you, because you and I have talked about it, what are some of the maybe terms, like you talked about earlier, trauma, for instance, like what should people understand about what that really means?
So trauma is any experience that takes you out of your window of tolerance, that is so unexpected, impossible to process, and really takes you out of where you are now, and something that is going to elicit the fight or flight response. There's stress, there's toxic stress, and there's trauma. And the thing about trauma is when someone has experienced acute trauma, which would be a car accident, a sudden death, an assault, or chronic trauma, which is something that's ongoing. So even if they're very small, a child's getting bullied in school, having to move to different schools. For an adult, it might be constantly being put down at work by a boss.
Right.
Anything that's going on. And complex is the combination of both. But trauma is subjective. So me and you could have the same exact experience. And it could be, we could be, God forbid, in a car accident together and have the same exact experience. You might walk away a little bit, shaking it off, feeling it for a few days, whereas I might have prolonged trauma from that because I have had other traumas in the past. So, and then what happens is, because when our body goes into that fight or flight mode, we're released so much hormones and cortisol and adrenaline and so on. And if that isn't able to be released through fighting back or through fleeing, if we're frozen or stuck in our situation, or we dissociate in any way, then that energy, that trauma energy, gets held on a cellular level in our body. And it looks like anxiety, phonetic energy, depression, lack of sleep, no appetite. And you're not really sure what exactly it is.
Yeah, look, you just said something, and I want to make sure we double click here, because you just named a whole bunch of symptoms that most people seem to have all the time. So check me on this, but something that we do on our team is we often talk about what we're observing in our clients, whether that be in a coaching session or in a meeting, when their reactions to things feel inappropriate for the situation itself. We often flag that to each other as, something to watch, if not investigate appropriately, and then maybe push them to get some help, because we feel like oftentimes, like you're saying, sadly, stress and depression, or look, even self-medicating, you mentioned that before, most of that feels really normal to people.
Yep.
Not really signs that there's a problem until the person overreacts, derails, in some way does something that feels too extreme to everybody else. And I think what you just said is important too, which is in the workplace, a whole team can have a boss who's a full-on bully. But it could really trigger someone's past trauma in their family or an abusive home situation. And so all of a sudden, one person in the team is telling a very different story than everybody else about the same situation. So I think it's so meaningful that we shine a light on this.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, trauma that's unhealed gets coupled on top of each other. So there's something called the ACE study, which everyone can go online and do themselves, which is, adverse childhood experiences, divorce, having a death in the family, an unavailable parent due to a set of circumstances, bullying, lots of different things that are all named in there. And it's becoming more and more and more prevalent that today, more and more people have at least 2, if not 4 adverse childhood experiences.
Mhm.
That being said, aside from our own personal traumas that we experience, it goes without saying that we are flooded with what is going on in the world today.
Mhm.
Going through the pandemic was a whole lot of trauma for a lot of people. The news, day to day, everything, all that's going on, the environment, it all seeps in. It all seeps into our unconscious. It all comes in there. And whether you realize it or not, you're having a reaction. You're having a somatic reaction to all of it. What you're reading, what you're seeing, what people are talking around you. And so it's essential that we understand what trauma is and what trauma isn't. And not everybody that experiences something traumatic, because to what you're saying, some people will say to me, well, then everyone has trauma. And the truth of it is, like, yes, everybody does have trauma, but not everybody's life becomes debilitated by that trauma.
Right. Yeah, and I think let's also double click on earlier what you were talking about yourself, and you were talking about like self-medicating versus alcoholism. I do believe that if we were to talk about the top 10 topics that come up in executive coaching cross industry, you and I have talked about this, like definitely by industry, everybody, and your industry better than we will, but by industry, we can usually, as executive coaches, see very clearly when we enter and do our discovery process. And I've shared this with you, Elisa, but for everybody, what I'm talking about is when we executive coach executives or leaders, like even down to the like vice president level, we do a discovery process. We try to find out about the person, but also the place. Like, what is contextually, what does it take to do this job well? What is the expectation that we wouldn't be there if they most likely were meeting those expectations? And often what we find out is that the culture of the place, but sometimes the culture of the industry promotes certain coping mechanisms. I don't know another way to say it, but not uncommon for people in high stress environments to all go out together after work. It's a really great example, right? So back when the stock market and I remember working in New York as a consultant for a while and realizing that the culture in the finance industry was work hard, play hard, right? Everybody went out after work and it was kind of an expected behavior. And you and I have talked about trade shows, right? Like, so let's just talk a little bit about that, because I think it is important for managers and leaders to kind of get real about, what is something that maybe they should be concerned about? Like, when does it cross the line from your perspective to the point of, again, you're not going to be someone's doctor or therapist. You guys, we're not preparing you for that, but you should have some awareness and know how to talk about it if in fact their performance starts to be impacted or you think the person's in trouble.
You just sparked something. I also believe that today, with addiction being at an all-time high, with suicide rates being at an all-time high, with overdoses being at an all-time high, and now the leading cause of death for people ages 18 to 45 and what's happening with the fentanyl crisis, that we do have to cut back a little on the amount that the companies are sort of condoning different sort of parties or celebrations that they're having. I
Yeah.
think we do need to be a little smarter and wiser about that piece.
Even
But
you just said something, I want to make sure everybody understands something. Even if your company doesn't condone it, like I said, it could be normalized.
Yep. And I think because there's so much depression, because all of the overdoses are the leading cause of death, I believe that it cannot be normalized anymore, because people are overdoing it, to say the least. So back to your question of what is self-medicating always goes to the why. Not everybody that is going to have a sloppy night or hitting the alcohol a little bit too much, or you're noticing them getting a little bit too rowdy at the party, or they're coming in a little hungover the next day, does not mean that they have alcoholism. But it does mean that they could be headed that way. And I always say to people, the question you should be asking me is, how do you get alcoholism? How do you get drug addiction? Everyone wants to know what the symptoms are after the fact. But I'm here to tell you, even with 20 years sober, you don't want the disease. It isn't curable. It's treatable every day with abstinence and a lot of other things, but it's not curable. So how do you get it? One, you have a genetic disposition to it. One of your family members has it. That increases the likelihood that you will also be more prone through epigenetics to get it. The other piece is the underlying why. Why are you using? What are you trying to avoid or push away or push down? So it's about your social setting or your underlying issues, if you will. If you have a mental health issue, you're also going to be more prone to possibly having an addiction and self-medicating in that way. The other thing is chronic use. The more you use a substance, or the more you drink alcohol, the more tolerant you're going to become, the more you're going to need, and the more likelihood that you're going to become addicted. And the last piece is for children under the age of 25, because their prefrontal cortex is not fully developed, and the likelihood of them becoming addicted if they start before that age also is a lot higher than someone who has started sort of that behavior after the age of 25. So those are a lot of things to consider. So back to the question about work. If you know that Bob just got divorced and you see him drinking a little bit more and more at the party, and you're noticing some issues, and you already know that this is going on. We don't have to know behind the scenes what's going on in the divorce. We just know that there's a big life event that has just happened, a big life event. And that's really all we need to know. That's a red flag. Let's check on Bob.
Yeah, it's really good. So again, I want to make sure that people who like to watch our stuff for real practical, that was really practical. And again, I want to say over and over again, we are not going to turn everybody into a therapist. That is not what we're trying to do. In fact, I say it to my team all the time. You are not qualified to be someone's therapist. Let's not do that. Let's pay attention to what's going on with people. Let's care, to your point, that Bob just had a traumatic life event. We don't know how he's experiencing that, but if his behavior is showing signs of stress, like you said, people can see that maybe he is going out more often, coming to work with, and that it is okay for you to express care for the person, right? That you are a manager or a leader, and it's your job to care about the humans. Let's just all, I mean, I've been saying that through the whole pandemic, and for some people, it seemed to be new thinking, which was amazing to me because they felt like there was so many off limits conversations, because of HIPAA privacy rules and HR rules. People didn't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole. And now I don't think we have the luxury of that, right? I think that's what you're saying. You gave me some stats. In fact, you didn't even say the number when you were talking about fentanyl, but some of the numbers you shared with me in the past were pretty scary. Like the number of people dying of overdose, I think you said was like.
So this past March, the CDC put out a report that said that not only was fentanyl the leading cause of death for ages 18 to 45, but that 108,000 people died from overdoses in 2021, which means every 5 minutes.
Yeah, that's mortifying.
So the not on my watch, or not in my company, or not in my backyard, or not in my house really doesn't apply anymore.
It's true. Yeah, I think it's true. And I want to come back to, as you were talking about soulbriety, because the soulbriety concept first has always felt very natural to me. So the minute you started talking about it when we were working together, I was like, duh, yeah, of course. But the workplace, depending on the culture in the workplace, I don't know that they're going to know immediately what you mean, right? Like what does that actually mean to think that at a soul level you're talking about maybe helping people want to get help and do like very deep inner work, right? That's not a normal conversation for most managers and leaders to have with people. Usually it's pretty shallow and it feels uncomfortable even at the shallowest level. So can we just talk about like, just maybe cast a vision of what you think in 5 years, maybe, or maybe sooner, but what would it look like?
That's such a good question. I agree. I mean, when clients come to RMA, I never start with sobriety. Hey, we're going to jump in and do soul work. We're definitely not there in day one. So, but what I would like to see with regard to sobriety is for individuals. I don't think it can be shared right off the bat. It's a personal journey. It's a personal process of understanding where you are in your life. Are you just about to try something new? Are you already down and going through some new creative endeavor? Are you coming up against all these obstacles in your life? Are you having a dark night of the soul where you can't seem to get out of your own way? Have you already had your own aha moment and are recognizing what you need to do to move forward? And then are you ready to share it with other people? And I think that depending upon where you are and your own inner journey, it becomes easier to talk to somebody else. Sobriety essentially is learning the language of soul. And for everybody, that's going to be different. Everybody's going to have their own unique definition of what that means, what their soul means to them. And there's many, as I talk about in the book, different gateways into understanding and cultivating wisdom from your unconscious and from the depths, and learning to that, what's important and what I talk about a lot in the book is that we don't just want to celebrate the good things, that's not the way that life works, that we all go through dark nights, we all have pain, we all have suffering, that's part of life as human beings, and we're all going to have struggles, and we all have. But wisdom is gained if you slow down during that process and you really stop to think about what is going on. For me, coming to the realization when I was working in the entertainment industry that I wasn't happy was the scariest thing in my life at the time.
Mhm.
And not knowing what to do next. And it wasn't like I woke up one day and decided, oh, obviously I'll just go build RMA and no problem. That took a couple of years to come to fruition. And during that process, I had to go deep. I had to look inward. And so I don't think that maybe sobriety is the advice. I think sobriety is the connection. Sobriety is about connecting to yourself
Yeah.
and being able to have deep connections with others.
Yeah. I want to add to your vision, since we've riffed on this a bit. I want everybody who's listening or watching to imagine also that, like what Elisa's saying is, this becomes less transactional, right? Like oftentimes management and leadership is highly transactional because we're trying to get stuff done. And by the way, I'm not mad at anybody for it, so don't think I'm criticizing you. Just hear this for a second and imagine the transformation if we move to a model of management and leadership being a partner, or as a leader or manager, you are a guide, you are an advisor, like you have many hats that you wear outside of the one that probably gets the most time and energy, which is the management of tasks. That's why when everybody, I'm saying that in the workplace, what I find in coaching and leadership, we've been doing this a long time. So I think I can, as an expert, say management and leadership is often so bound by time to get stuff done with people or through people, or sometimes even against people's will, right? But get shit done. That's what we do. And because of that, relationships are very transactional. So we're actually, I think, proposing the opposite of that, Elisa, right? Like we're saying, we're imagining a world where, I love the way you said it, you don't on day one, number one, maybe go all the way to the soul conversation. Maybe for some people you do, but you care about the whole person. And you take the time. I know some people are going to argue with me about this, and I dare you. But that means the relationship matters, right? That means you get to know people. In COVID, by the way, I think one of the beauties of that experience was that we did have an entry point in through Zoom or Teams into people's lives, because many people went to home and had to do that. But I think the future we're proposing is, whether you're in person or remote, it's not a luxury item anymore, right? And we need to create a relationship so that by the time you do have a concern about someone, it's not an awkward conversation. Like the whole time you've cared about the whole human, which then allows them to feel comfortable being whole. Does that make sense?
Or being vulnerable.
Yeah, being vulnerable, that's a lot better. Like I said, I knew this was going to go too fast. It's been amazing. I feel like we're going to probably need way more of these, but soon you're going to be famous because your book's going to be out December 6th, right?
December 6th.
Yeah, so you can pre-order it now if you want to on Amazon. Elisa Hallerman. I have to keep reading the title because I want to get it right, since I keep saying it wrong every time.
Soulbriety.
Yeah.
A plan to heal your trauma, overcome addiction, and reconnect to your soul. And you can pre-order it anywhere books are sold right now.
Yeah. But I'm going to say to everybody listening, last thing, don't be afraid of this. Like, this isn't a normal management idea yet. Be a way shower with us, like embrace this. I know you care about humans. I know you want to be better, or you wouldn't be listening to this. So we're going to give you something maybe that feels at the moment out of the ordinary, but we're going to make it normal. So we invite you to be in the front of this with us. Elisa, I just want to say thank you. And I can't wait to be a part of whatever happens here as you bring this book into the world. You really are a gem, and in the best way, the no mercy killer. I just want to say that because you solve problems and do things for people that I think are quite miraculous. So thanks.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And you have already been such a big part of my soul journey. So I love you.
Love you too.